Okay, so I wanted to do a episode briefly to touch on what's going on or has gone on with Guangzhou, specifically for China, and with like all the different fragile relationships going on. I would rather focus on the overarching issues, and I'm going to get back to those happening in my own country. But because this is kind of like has an overlap, and I feel like as a black person, I should definitely like contribute my 2 cents on what's going on and how it's playing out. I'm here to like try to do that. So before I even came to China, I was kind of like cautious about going to Guangzhou specifically because I felt like it had a history of like just drama, and certain provinces, just like certain states in the United States, have their own drama, and just it's sometimes like more disadvantageous, I would say, for certain people, especially black people perhaps, to go visit these locations. And so I'm cautious of going anywhere in the world where I would be like at a significant disadvantage other than in my own country. But actually, even within the United States, I'm somewhat cautious about like I don't have any immediate desire to go visit Alabama, regardless of any historical value, right? Because Alabama has like lots of anti-black sentiments, and there's just lots of bad stuff over there, laws and stuff. I just think are not healthy, and the only reasons I would probably go there is if there's like a significantly, like I require a significantly good reason to go venture to these locations. Uh, it becomes difficult to say like because the United States kind of has a history of racism, and we're not like we don't have necessarily the monopoly on racism, but I would say we have it's pretty close in a lot of ways. Like, how can I put it? We we're like the brand name in racism. I think that's the good way of putting it. When people think racism, they're like, oh, the United States. There's lots of it there. And I mean, that's not saying, again, we want to be cautious. Like, if we're using generalization as a tool and with consciousness that is not the absolute picture, yes, by and large, there's a large percentage of the United States that harbors anti-black sentiment and just like like kind of xenophobic sentiments, and they're often xenophobic towards immigrants, people from different religious backgrounds, especially in homogenous locations. So if there's like a location that's like fairly homogenous, especially if it includes European Americans, it tends to be the case that there's a kind of a pushback against people seen as being foreign to the location, or people that are just fundamentally different in worldview, and like unfortunately they usually do this through phenotypes by kind of just weeding out somebody who looks different. And I see this a lot with like people. One example is I remember after 9/11 that there was an attack on a Gurdwara, and this is not, unfortunately, this is not something new, but there people who are ignorant and don't know the difference can't really, they see somebody who looks sort of foreign and they associate them as being like a Muslim extremist somehow. First of all, they're wrong on several levels, because not all the Muslims, there's like a billion Muslims, of course, right? Not all of them are extremists, of course. Not even most of them are extremists. The world would be much more chaotic if most Muslims were extremists. And I honestly think that the United States often is helping to perpetuate a lot of the things that it's supposedly trying to fight. We often create our own demons, and a lot of people who we end up having to deal with later on end up being ones that we put in power in the first place. Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, like who else? I mean, technically Pinochet, but like we didn't really fix anything. We just kind of like helped him get to power and defended him, and then we just like let things go as they would be. But this is like a cursory review of history. We can do as footnotes. Basically, in Saudi Arabia is a current example, because the United States has generally backed Saudi Arabia, even though like they're not democratic and they perpetuate all sorts of human rights violations. But they got the oil, and we want the oil, we want the money, so that's what it comes down to. And that's why I try to like parse and separate so people can have a clear perspective, because a lot of people have like a rose-colored glasses regarding their perspective of their own country. And as an American, I fortunately have been able to transcend that largely. I'm aware of the things that are generally wrong with the United States. It's almost obvious to me in a lot of ways, and I'm like shocked that other Americans aren't aware of this. But I'm not really that shocked, sadly. Like, if you understand why and how the United States came to power, you kind of understand why they probably want to keep things how they've been, and they kind of like why most people are just comfortable and stay kind of in their little boxes. They don't want to question the general narrative. There's not a lot of critical thinking going on, it seems like, and this is dangerous. This is dangerous probably anywhere in any country and under any system probably. However, I think this is mostly and especially dangerous within a democracy, which is what we're a democratic republic. And so if we're a democratic republic, we vote on people who are supposed to represent our welfare and protect our rights and things according to the Constitution by and large, and periodically advance and upgrade the Constitution itself. We amend the Constitution when we think it's not clear enough, or we need to add on to the rights. And there were provisions in the original Bill of Rights that suggested that there would be other rights that we might come to later on and claim. If anything, we've been actually kind of regressing in regards to civil rights and regards to civil liberties as well. So how does this all go back to Africa and China and the United States? All right, I'm gonna try and be a little bit briefer here, because one, as a guest in a foreign country, that I actually think China's cool. I'm visiting here and working here right now, and I think China is by and large pretty awesome. Any negative sentiments I get here have been very minimal, at least in the province I've chosen. And that's part of the reason I put it I did my homework before choosing a province to go to. Just I wouldn't just go to any state in the United States, and especially the South, just to expecting everything to be all kosher and stuff without some kind of forward research. I try not to just go cast my life to the wind. So on that note, I made sure I saw Guangzhou had a large African diaspora there. I saw that there were a lot of foreigners in general there, but with all of that, there's layers of drama that can come with it. And so I'm aware of the what happens. It's a human thing more so than anything, I think. It's not a Chinese or an American thing per se, although I would argue that the capitalist system and American history kind of reinforce the xenophobia more so than I would argue happens in China. But China, there's been periods of difficulty with other external forces and outsiders. So I mean, it's not an alien experience or phenomenon within China itself. There, even amongst I think certain groups within certain ethnic groups, I think probably face some adversity because of the ethnic group they might have come from. And this is throughout the history of China. So it was not just current China, throughout of China, the 5,000 years of Chinese history, there have been these kind of divides. And you even see it today with HK. They don't want it, they were taken by force by the British, and then they were given some autonomy to do their own thing, and there was a revisionist thing going on, because a lot of people view in the same way that a lot of people in America think of American history all romantically and stuff, when there's lots of evil shit that happened in the past. A lot of people in HK are not aware of a lot of the evil shit under the British rule that happened, and that's something to be concerned about as well. But it's just, there's clearly some kind of psychological and ideological divide and identity politics of sorts, or factionalism, between HK and mainland by and large. So, you could kind of get that sentiment based on the riots and stuff they had, right? Same thing happens in the United States. You could tell by the say the race riots in the United States, or what happened in Baltimore not too long ago. I mean, relatively, and throughout American history, there's just all sorts of uprisings by different groups of people, and sometimes the same group of people over time. Black people, for example, have had to struggle many times to protect and enforce their rights, and oftentimes they've not been as successful as we would have liked to believe. And it's not necessarily a fault of their own. It's just that the United States is structured in a way, as I believe, as to kind of deprive the majority of Africans or African Americans and black people of a lot of their rights, or like find a way to circumvent them. Hence, black people and Hispanics are overwhelmingly incarcerated, even though we make a small, well, black people specifically, make up a smaller portion of the population. So, I mean, also, there's just like layers and layers onto these things. There's systemic racism, and there's a history of this systemic racism over time that's helped keep black people in the United States in poverty, in relative poverty, basically, and deprive them even of their wealth, like the ones that had wealth, of their wealth over time. So this isn't just to say for black people. There are other groups of people who are also dispossessed, I would argue, and oppressed. And even if you want to go into gender dynamics, you could say LGBTQ people and women have also been under this kind of attack to an extent, to varying extents throughout time. And since probably the beginning of the United States, this has been something that's just been cropping up back and forth. So I feel like, as my visiting here, I'm going to focus on the dimensions that have regard my own country more so. I will say that I think the national government of China does care and was trying to pursue a positive relationship with Africans. However, Guangzhou is kind of like sort of fucking that up for them, I think. And this, like, I don't even know if it's the local government of Guangzhou per se. It might be, it might not be, but the people who are in relationship to this, because if you have to also like kind of look at it from, is this the government systematically doing this, or is this a like local cultural thing going on where there's like a de facto agreement amongst the common populace to not treat a certain group fairly? And this happens, again, you could see this in Jim Crow in the United States. Of course, like a lot of the things that, like slavery was outlawed, and a lot of different things were outlawed, supposedly giving black people the rights right after, like the Emancipation Proclamation, right? But we still had, what's the word for it? We still had like sharecroppers, and we still had like all sorts of systemic and de facto racism, like just essentially people agreeing to external to the law itself as like closed groups to alienate and dispossess and oppress black people in general. Now, this is a very long and painful history, and there's lots of layers to this that keep intertwining with each other. But I'm using the comparison for the sake of comparing the context of what's going on with Guangzhou with what the United States does, and it just seems like a little bit hypocritical at times. Like a lot of times, black people are asking for and fighting for their rights and stuff, and like for example, the police brutality and the Black Lives Matter movement. But I'm not seeing the same like vehement media attention necessarily without a lot of effort, or kind of supposed caring about our issues as much as when, like, I'd say if something happens in Guangzhou, it's of course it's almost a political tool for the United States to use as a weapon against China, I think. And I mean, that's not to say that there's not legitimate concerns, and as a country, is your fiduciary duty, I think, to look out for the welfare of your citizens, especially regardless of what ethnic group or whatever like racial background they belong to. You're supposed to look out for your citizens. And so I mean, there's a legitimate concern there for the United States to like be like, hey, you shouldn't do that. But at the same time, the United States does lots of all sorts of like racist bullshit back home, and I'm not trying to like, I'm trying very hard to be on point about this and not just engage in whataboutism. However, it is relevant to this overall problem to see how the United States and whether it's like, see how the United States has operated in the past, how it's operating now, and compare that and contrast it with what happened in China. In China, regarding the history, I did like a mock research. I had like did a little bit before I got here, and I was like, there's already too much drama when I started to look it up in the first place. But I went back and did a little more homework on like African diaspora and Guangzhou specifically, because Guangzhou has the largest population of Africans, right? And like black people, technically, because we're mostly black people from Africa, right? So with that in mind, I noted that there was the 1990s to 2000, there was an economic boom, there's immigration. Wherever there's like an economic boom and there's like things seem like they're going up compared to wherever you're staying, everybody's trying to jump onto like wherever they're going to do better than they were at before. So like some Americans don't realize that they're like actually technically doing worse in the United States than they would be if they were to leave the United States, because the United States, for whatever reasons, is becoming increasingly, I mean, I would argue it's capitalism, but not just capitalism, but especially capitalism. But the United States is hostile to social mobility of certain groups of people. Let's put it that way. I think that's a safe and fair criticism to levy. Now, for people from, say, Mexico, immigrants from Mexico who are coming from a more impoverished country, like we can say fairly, I think, that Mexico is not as rich as the United States. That's not a controversial claim, right? And unfortunately, there's lots of crime there, and like there's lots of things. Not only these things, there's lots of beautiful things, I'm sure, as well about Mexico. But unfortunately, like if you were to compare these things and you want to raise children somewhere, everybody wants to raise their children in or under better conditions than whatever they're going through presently. And this includes the first world. Hence, that's why I left my country. I'm like over here trying to make money and prosper, because I feel like it's not as accessible back home. Let's put it that way. So, yeah. We're getting to the 20-minute mark, and I'm trying to end all these videos around 20 minutes. I want to get back to the core problem, or the core issue. Basically, alright, there are legitimate concerns for all parties. For China, their legitimate concern is public health. Yes, this is a legitimate concern. They should be concerned, and there were Nigerian people and black people who did test positive for the virus. It wasn't only them, I'm pretty sure. But I mean, of course, they're gonna, freak out about it. After the 1990s and 2000, when there was an economic boom, there was kind of a slow crackdown on the immigration from Africa, because unfortunately, when you have people immigrating from impoverished countries and there's not enough oversight, you have to vet people, right? You can have lots of undesirable elements, criminal elements, that are trying to subvert laws and make money at the expense of whatever country they're coming into. And this is a concern. I understand the conservative arguments regarding immigration, illegal immigration, and I think they're blown out of proportions and maybe not being enacted correctly. But let's put this on the back burner for another discussion. By and large, we're just comparing. There's drawbacks that come with immigration that China was trying to curtail because there was a lot of it, and they were trying to balance it out. Now, how you can judge how they did it on your own merits and do your own research. I'm not gonna that's not what this is about. I'm just saying this is the chain of events that seems to have happened. Economic boom, 1990s to 2000. Then around 2009, there's more friction, because this is what generally happens amongst. There's a native population, and immigrant population. Usually, if there's a large enough immigrant population, there's a pushback between these two forces, because one will see the other as the enemy for whatever reasons. It's just human factionalism type thing. And sometimes there's usually a mix of legitimate and illegitimate criticisms going on, levied at either side. Immigrants ideally have a right, I would like to believe, to seek to live in a better place, but they also are required to respect whatever territory or land they move to. And if they do so, they have to be mindful in how they approach these things. Let's put it that way. So by 2009, there was a guy who ran. There was two guys who were Nigerians, because they're one of the largest diasporas here, and African diaspora, and they were chased by immigration officials and supposedly jumped off a building, and they were assumed they had died by the local Nigerian immigrant population. Apparently they survived, but it was assumed, because there's not of as much transparency regarding certain information in China because of Great Firewall and other precautions that the Chinese government tries to take to prevent misinformation or just subversion. So unfortunately, this ended up working against them, and that sometimes happens when you have to kind of shield off how much information you want people to have available at any time. And the opposite can happen too for the United States. The United States can have actually like be overwhelmed with like a mix of information that is false or misinformative, and so that's another video all on its own right there. But the main point being, in about 2009, there was an incident that like created initial like a significant divide, or inflamed the divide between the African diaspora there and the Chinese community. Then around 2012, there was what was it? There was someone who was died in custody supposedly. I have to do extensive research to confirm a lot of things, but generally, it's what I've read suggested that like somebody died in custody in Guangzhou. It was African, and it seemed mysterious. Of course, people who were Nigerian came out and like there was like a riot that followed, lots of drama. People like there's like just everybody upset. So there's inflammation there. 2012ish. Shortly after that, there's another one. Let me see. I made a note on it. And that one was so after 2012. Essentially, there was an increase in immigrant enforcement or immigration enforcement, and a lot of like businesses started to slowly like discourage people who they thought might be from Africa or who held African passports, and this is just like it's like a mixture, because I have a feeling that the local government might have been slightly involved, but I don't know these things, so I have to like go off of instinct of what I think might have happened. So I don't want to be unfair, and I try to be like charitable to all sides as much as I reasonably can, although I'm a little bit harder on my own country because I'm allowed to do that as an American, right? But generally speaking, after that point, there's a decrease in the African diaspora there, and kind of increasing pressure from the local population, I think, against African immigrants in the area. And that is not to say this is a uniform thing that happened throughout China. Probably might have actually just been concentrated primarily in that location, because as near as I can tell, like from my own direct experiences, any anti-foreign sentiment I have experienced, which was very minimal by the way, like compared to back home, like man, but any anti-foreign sentiment is probably the same for like majority of different kinds of foreigners. So you could just be any foreigner probably, and they're gonna they're gonna harbor the same sentiments by and large if they're not feeling you. Let's put it that way. I think that's a healthy and safe way to put it. But yeah, so it's like something that's shared as an outsider to the community, and so I've been seeing a lot of like positive stuff by and large that doesn't crop up that often, thankfully, and that's probably it's just like in certain states are more kind of like have more xenophobia going on for them, or certain, or maybe more whatever characteristics to them than other states. I use Alabama as my go-to example because they're like bad at a lot of things. It's like verified that Alabama has drama and problems, and I think in this way that certain parts of China have, let's say, room to grow in regards to their practices or their policies regarding, like, say, foreigners or something like that. But it doesn't even just have to be foreigners, it could be anything. And that's probably true of any given country. You go to any country and you pick out certain pieces and like certain segments or areas of it, and some will be doing better and like more like humanistic or whatever it is, and other ones will be like more like not feeling foreigners or not feeling like any group of people that they view as like a rival or somehow like are led to believe are their adversary. So I think that traversed the general timeline I recall reading about, and it leads up to now when like this could have been from, and this is going to say, let me the dark side, I'll say, for each of the different groups involved, is for some of the African people who come here, there are people who are like probably illegally here doing shady stuff. Unfortunately, Nigeria is familiar, like it's kind of like notorious in some ways for scams and stuff, or like not great things sometimes. There's lots of great things I'm sure about the country, but it has that reputation. And even my grandfather was like basically scammed by Nigerians. So it's like, not that I don't have any beef against like, I've like, yeah, don't really have significant beef against anybody in particular, except for maybe capitalism and Euro-Americans and Europeans. In regard to those who subscribe to like attitudes I think are xenophobic or are white supremacy or these kind of things, you know. In general, like I want to like everybody. I want everybody like I want to at least generally feel approximately the same about most people, regardless of where they come from or what they are. As long as you're not Nazi or like something vile and evil, it's like something that you like. I try to judge people on character, so as long as you're not like inherently a bastard or an asshole, not bastard's not even a good word because like the science, like the definition behind that's bad. As long as you're not like a vicious human being just for the sake of being a vicious human being, or out of gross ignorance that you are like comfortable in. I think that's a good way of putting it. So that's what I'm really trying to target most of the time. It just happens to be that certain groups will subscribe, like in varying degrees, to certain attitudes based upon their privileges or lack of privileges, and we want to kind of even that shit out. But I felt like I needed to do something on this issue. And so if we're talking about the dark side of American sentiments regarding this, the United States doesn't really care about black people that often. Like, we don't get that much attention. Like, we get attention, but like what has really significantly changed? And you can point out lots of like stuff here and there, but the United States still has high incarceration rates of black people. The United States still has police brutality against black people and people in general, but like especially black people, and they get away with it more when it's black people. And the United States has like systemic systems in place, like redlining, and just there's things that are designed, I think, structurally throughout the United States to hurt like people in general and like keep people like the power structures as they have been, and keep like wealth concentrated in the hands of a few. But it's even more so when it comes to if you're a black person, a Native American, or a woman. It's just like they're doubling down on how to fuck you. So yeah, I didn't think I was gonna go into like 30 minutes, but I feel like this is kind of one of those things that I should try and go at length in and trying to really like flesh out. I can't go. This is like a very complicated concept, like a discussion to have, and there's many layers to it, and various contexts to appraise and see how they fit together like a jigsaw puzzle and talk about. But I only have so much time, and I don't want to like bore you guys too much. So this is just my thoughts on like what's going on. I think the United States, from the good side, you can say, hey, they're trying to look out for their citizens, and that's their job. Even if they don't even if they treat black people bad back home, or they don't treat black people as well as they should be treated. That's a nice way of saying it. Even if they don't treat black people as well as they should be at home, we're technically citizens still, so we're supposed to get rights. But I think the real reason they care as much as they do is this kind of takes some of the heat off of the Trump administration, realistically speaking, because they're fucking up epically. And yeah, it's like USA, it's like, oh, this gives us a chance to talk shit about China. They're all excited about that. And then for China, they're like trying not to rock the boat, and they don't want to look bad. But unfortunately, certain groups of people in the country are fucking it up a little bit by being discriminatory when they don't have to be. And there's two possibilities I can think of off the top of my head that might be the case. It could be that there's like large populations or large enough populations of people who are being, and these are not necessarily government officials, these could just be normal fucking people living here, that are like in Guangzhou, they might not have the necessary same level of education to understand what, like, to guard their minds against adopting xenophobic or racial attitudes and sentiments. And there's lots of reasons this might be the case. Often I consider poverty to be a thing that kind of like encourages factionalism, or just like lack of information. Maybe they just don't have a chance to be exposed to it, or maybe you haven't met enough people who are black. I don't know, it could be a lot of things. But these people, I think, that are like the people from McDonald's that like were like, oh, no black people in here. They changed they changed their minds pretty quick once they got national pressure and corporate pressure from the external entities that are giving them their paychecks. And that's what really, unfortunately, a lot of this stuff ends up coming down to, is like black people are kind of caught in between different power structures, and we don't have much of our in the way of our own to kind of like bolster and ensure we have like are being fully respected by whether it be a government or a group of people. And I mean, sometimes we win, but a lot of times we've had to take losses or like grin and bear it. And hopefully this proves a learning experience for all concerned. Hopefully the United States suddenly cares more about black people, and like the people in Guangzhou are respected more or whatnot, or like that like more respect African Americans and African citizens and black people in general. And like and then hopefully people from Africa and the nations of Africa will be a little more stringent on like how people are able to enter and exit the country, because I mean then it relieves some of the pressure on China. But it would be nice to see all these different countries try to work together to solve problems rather than just point fingers. And I mean, it's kind of easy to point fingers, and the United States loves doing that because then we don't have to talk about our own problems. But yeah, we're gonna have to start figuring out how to solve problems together instead of just like pointing fingers. And that's something I think was a central idea or theme I'm trying to get at the end of this. I know it was a lot. I'm trying to string these ideas back together a little bit better. I think I touched on everything though. Like, yeah, Africans have like their legitimate concern is discrimination. That's a legitimate concern. Nobody wants to be discriminated against. The drawback is there is like from Africa, there's lots of corruption, and there are people doing illegal activities that bring some of that that either facilitate it here or elsewhere, and it becomes problematic. So like people are concerned, and this is every country has some of this going on, but Nigeria is kind of a little bit famous for or notorious. And unfortunately, it's one of those things. It's like because black people are kind of just like we're just grouped together, so you can't just be like, oh, it's just these guys. Like it's just easier just to assume the whole group. That's how fucking the United States treats Muslims and how it treats Mexican people. Like if you look Latino, if you're like a Honduran person or a Venezuela or whatnot, they don't give a fuck. They're like, you're fucking like they just xenophobic, period. So like you might as well be the thing that they think they don't like because you look enough like it to them. And again, our world lacks nuance, our world lacks education, our world lacks compassion, and it lacks critical thinking. We need to figure out how to fix this shit. And as black people, it sucks because we're like, we understand the problem pretty intimately, I think, but we also are not reaching our fullest potential in trying to combat it with the little bit of power that we do have. That being said, there's only so much we can realistically do. Like, we need these other powerful entities to also maybe make some room. But when you're not like powerful, it's easy for everybody to try and bully you and push you around. And that's, I'm not saying Africa or black people are not are powerful or capable or like popular or whatever the fuck you want to call it, but I'm saying that we require we need more of a presence and institution to defend our interests. And as we build build up ourselves as an economic bloc, a unified economic bloc, and as a unified power, whether that be militarily, economically, or in some other fashion that is respected by the world's people, by humans, then we're going to be able to get more of that respect. But again, otherwise we're in a situation that's not too dissimilar from like the Syrians or the Kurds or whatnot, or like any group of fucked over people like Native Americans or the people of the indigenous people of Australia. I've got another name, but you get where I'm going with this. So on that note, I'm going to end this at 35 minutes. I'm sorry that it went this long, but it's just one of those discussions, and I tried to distill my thoughts a little bit more in a slightly more structured fashion. I tend to get a little bit off subject, so I wanted to keep it that to like 20 minutes, but here we are, 35 minutes. So thank you for your time. If you have any discussion or like want to discuss anything or ideas and whatnot in the comment section, let me know and I'll try to respond to them as soon as I'm able to. I might be busy. It might take a while, but I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So thank you, and hopefully like everybody comes to a better understanding. I have faith that China has tremendous potential and is not as discriminatory as the United States is, and will, because they want a positive relationship with Africa, the government will do what they can to mitigate the xenophobia. But let's also remember that it was one part of China that this kind of is intensely a problem, versus like several parts. You can go to America and find like several parts of America, like whole states that are pretty like xenophobic and or racist. And so yeah, it's like look at the history, the political nature of these things, and like we gotta see the whole picture in order to kind of have a healthy solution for it. So yeah, power of the people. Thank you. Peace out.